Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you along to this evening's full council meeting, including members, officers and any members of the public who may be attending remotely. Please be advised that the meeting will be live streamed and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the council's data retention policy, and the recording of the meeting may be added to the council's website. The following staff are in attendance: the Chief Executive, Larissa Reid, Lisa Fillery, Director of Resources, who's online, David Clifford, the Monitoring Officer, Robin Harris, Deputy Monitoring Officer, and Joe Millard and Kelly McKenzie from Democratic Services. Please may I remind members, when they are called to speak loudly and clearly in order that the OWL system can pick up your voice for the broadcast. Alternatively, you may come forward to the front and stand or sit near the top table when you wish to speak so that the OWL can pick up the sound clearly. So agenda item 1, evacuation procedure. To the best of my knowledge, there are no fire drills planned for this evening's event. In the event of a fire alarm going off, you have the emergency exits to my left. So you make your way out there into the car park and wait further instructions. If there's anyone in attendance that may require assistance in evacuating the building, please make themselves known now. Thank you. I'd now like to invite the Chief Executive to give any apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have received apologies from Councillor Darby, Dendor, Jays, Marchington and MacDonald, and also the Deputy Chief Executive, Emma Wiggins, is also in attendance at the meeting online. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held in this room on the 12th of October. Minutes 373 to 387. Is it members' wishes that I sign these as a correct record? Thank you, members. For agenda item 4, any declarations of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest? Thank you very much. So item 5, Mayor's announcements. Members will know that members say Alison Peters, the Principal Urban Designer and Landscape Officer, passed away recently, and we give our condolences to Alison's family, friends and colleagues. I'd like to invite the leader, Councillor Baldock, to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I first met Alison, way back in the early days of this administration, it was a little awkward. She had been employed to work in the Garden Cities that the previous administration had planned to incorporate in the local plan review, and which the incoming administration had indicated were no longer the favoured approach for solving Swales' housing targets. Naturally, she was uncertain of what her role would be in any new approach, or indeed whether she would be needed at all. It didn't take long, however, for a new set of challenges to be offered to her. After all, we weren't going to let someone with the skills and experience Alison had go begging. Experience that had seen her work in many different countries and several continents, including Hong Kong, Malaysia and India, where she worked on designing new towns and resorts, as well as design tenders for a new airport in Hong Kong. Whilst the new administration had some pretty grand ideas, it has to be admitted that we weren't looking at introducing a new airport. But we were keen to do some major work in our town centres. One of Alison's major projects while she was with us was the Sittingbourne Town Centre SPD, which was recently approved by the council and which promises a major change in approach to Sittingbourne Town Centre with an exciting and innovative new approach to freshen up the area. As this project unfolds in the coming years, it will stand as a living testament to Alison's ideas and concepts and will be a long-standing tribute to her. Alison was also involved in a number of smaller design projects and gave advice on many others, which often required meeting in person. In these meetings, her convictions and self-confidence in her work came across really well, and I'll admit, I was more than a little petrified of her. When challenged or questioned, she had such a sure grip on the subject and left you thinking that your own ideas were somewhat rubbish, and you should probably not bother to suggest them again. So when I really wanted to see a change to one of her ideas, I confess I spoke to a fellow councillor, persuaded that councillor that I was right, and then left her to fight our corner, offering tentative backup when it felt safe to do so. Sorry, Monique, you did make the case there. Alison was also excellent at responding to consultations, crystallising our visions into the sort of short, pointed responses that such consultations require, especially on the Kent design work, which she considered too generic and not sufficiently Kent specific, and in helping complete some of our successful funding bids. Just as a small taste of some of the other projects that Alison worked on during her time with us, were the car parking SPD, draft local plan policies on design, on health and on well-being, a tree study to deliver more street trees and trees generally throughout new developments, new signage in Faversham Town Centre and Sittingbourne Town Centre, and working with KCC and Leisure Services colleagues on the wayfinding project, design codes and work on design guidance for DM colleagues to help them build their own design muscles, design and landscape input to schemes to ensure future residents could live and work in attractive, safe and stimulating environments. She undoubtedly raised the profile of urban design and landscaping, and she worked on development strategies for the emerging local plan review. In short, Alison was only with us for a few short years, but her work and ideas will live on across our borough for generations.
Thank you, councillor Baldock. I'd now like to invite councillor Gibson to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for affording me the opportunity and privilege to say a few words about Alison on behalf of the Labour Group. Firstly, can I say that Alison was never defined by her illness, more by the strength, dignity, courage and determination in the manner in which she fought it. Whilst Alison was extremely passionate about her work, her greatest love, of course, was her young son, Augustine, who plays football alongside my own grandson for Faversham Town under-13s. And our heartfelt condolences go out to him as he experiences such deep sadness at such a tender age. I had the privilege of remotely attending the celebration of her life on Saturday. And it was at that moment that it became blatantly obvious that Swelborough Council was indeed, to quote her colleague Jill Peat, punching well above its weight in appointing Alison. Alison was described by those who knew her best as caring, courageous, committed, personable, persuasive and resilient, supportive, good-humoured, hard-working, and of course, unerring in her dedication to wearing her trademark red liquid. Alison's career had a truly worldwide profile, having worked in such far-flung places as our leader has just alluded to, as Malaysia, China, India, and fortunately, for us all here, sunny Sittingbourne. Swell Council family and the planning team in particular have been left with a huge void by Alison's passing, but she has left us with an enduring legacy, having been the author of our Council SPD document, on which she worked slavishly hard to conclude. It was testimony to Alison's qualities and attributes that it was endorsed by all members of this council as it was unanimously approved at our previous full council meeting. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Gibson. I'd now like to call councillor Bonney, please.
Very much. So was a huge asset to this council in terms of design. I think many of you probably heard me blather on for years about sometimes the lack of design and care in some of the projects we've seen come forwards. And her skill set at the council was enormously appreciated by me, but also by many other colleagues and councillors. Her work on the Sittingbourne Town Centre SPD project was a huge task, and she was absolutely dedicated and diligent right up to the end. No one would have known how well she was. My abiding memory, though, is her colourful clothes and her pink hair. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Bonney. I'd now like to invite members to stand for a minute's silence in tribute to Alison. Thank you. Just finally, on my announcements, a few things I'd like to point out that I've attended on behalf of the council. I attended the Diversity House end of project awards at Hempstead House a few weeks ago. It was well, it's difficult to describe the project, but it was an 11-week project which was funded by Hartlepool government, and they were handing out the awards to those who completed the course and done so with distinction. I attended the British Legion Poppy Appeal launch in the Forum, where I met up with the with former councillor and Alderman Sue Gent, who's the chair of the local Poppy Appeal. I attended the Armistice Day commemorations at Halfway Cemetery, along with Councillor Baird, the Mayor of Queenborough, and others. And then on Sunday last, I attended the remembrance service at St Michael's Church, followed by a procession to the Cenotaph, where it was my privilege to speak and make the notoriety. I think what it is now, notoriety. Can't think what the word is now, but anyway, it was my honour to say those words. This morning I was over at Richmond Academy on the island. They've been awarded a certificate by Microsoft for their innovative use of software and technology in their teaching. And I was absolutely amazed. The way the children interact with the technology from year 3, they've all got their own iPad. There are iPads that the year 1 and year 2 students can use, but they're left at the school. And I never realised how much more Microsoft Teams can do, other than just being a video conferencing platform. We also were shown their children using what a lot of us might term as just a video game, a version of Minecraft, to help them with their projects and their learning. And one of the groups in year 5 was showing me their project, where they'd got a mock-up of the town of Bath, and they were studying the old Roman underfloor heating systems, and they design and they program in, obviously with the help of the staff, all the technology, the various platforms that they need to actually build this virtually 3D platform. Absolutely amazing. And I think, looking back, possibly if we, those of us sitting in here, if we'd have had that sort of technology and that sort of interaction when we were at school, perhaps, those of us that didn't enjoy school may have enjoyed it a lot more. And tomorrow morning, I will be joining Councillor Ingleton at Sunnybank School for the opening of their new £4.4 million nursery block. So that'll be my privilege to do that. And finally, members, you may have received the email, but just to let you all know that unfortunately I've had to cancel my quiz evening, which was to be held here, due to lack of numbers, unfortunately. Hopefully, in the new year at some point, I may be able to replan that or another event. So thank you for that. remiss of me. I must thank all those members who on Sunday laid wreaths at the remembrance services at churches and memorials all over the borough on behalf of this authority. So thank you very much indeed, anyone who laid their wreaths. Okay, moving on then to agenda item 6, the leader's statement. I will ask the leader to read his statement and then I will ask the leader of the opposition to respond. Following that, I will invite other members to respond to the leader's statement. Members invited to speak will have 3 minutes. This item has an overall time limit of 30 minutes to ensure broad fairness. I will try to invite responses from members of the administration and opposition groups in roughly equal numbers. This may mean that I deviate from the order in which members indicate to me that they wish to speak. Can I please remind all members that responses must be to issues raised in the leader's statement. Councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I would like to thank councillors for bearing with us and for your patience and perseverance as we continue to work on whilst Whale House is shut. It is not ideal, but the Apple Yard has proved to be an adequate substitute for the short term, despite not being filled up for these kind of meetings. Work at Whale House progresses nicely, and we are still set for a return on December the 19th. Well, we still live in unsettled times, and looking forward, we have a crucial budget to prepare for the coming years. Members will probably be aware that both Kent County Council and Hampshire County Council have written to the government warning about significant government intervention they face bankruptcy within 2 years. They are far from being the only councils in this predicament. And district councils are also facing the prospect of having to make huge cuts in services as we struggle with inflation and hugely rising contract costs. We await the government's budgetary announcements tomorrow with a hope there will be a badly needed support package for local councils, but sadly with very little expectation. The mood music from Westminster is depressing, and we can but hope that this is just a prelude to actually delivering something better than expected, so that the crumbs we get will seem more like full slices, even though the full loaf seems ever further away. And we are, of course, also still awaiting definite news on the levelling up bids, now delayed to the end of the year rather than in the autumn. And this also has budgetary implications, as well as the hopes of many people in our borough. Again, there has been uncertainty about these projects, and even a suggestion they may be cancelled. Hopefully tomorrow's statement will kill both fears off. However, such is the continued uncertainty that following my statement last month about investment zones, there are now indications that Rishi Sunak may be about to dump those as well. I think we all look forward to a degree of stability coming from this government one day. Even confirmation of bad news is better than false clingings on in vain to vain hopes. And then we have COP27, another exercise in generating more hot air than ever before. But what does it achieve? The world leaders and experts talk and exchange ideas and well-meaning soundbites, as they have done for years. But what really changes? New targets, new means of sidestepping those targets, new excuses for not meeting those targets. At a time of global austerity, and who exactly is the planet Earth in debt to? Venus. At a time of global austerity, a willingness to take the decisions needed is ever more evident by its absence. Whether one believes climate change is man-made or not, the evidence is all around us that the climate is changing, yet no government is willing to take on the real culprits, the multinational global giants who can control our economies. Until we face up to the fact that we need a major systems change across the globe, not necessarily to try and prevent climate change, but to be able to live in those future conditions. Global trade and reliance on global markets is where the weaknesses in our resilience are at the most extreme. And these are where we need to challenge the current discourse and start supporting local communities across the world to become more self-sufficient and more sustainable. We don't need tweaks to enable us to carry on as we are. We need to change the way we are so that communities do not collapse as the climate continues to batter our cosy assumptions. And equally, we don't need to keep rewarding oppressive regimes by awarding them sporting events like the Olympics and the World Cup. One ray of good news did, however, come in the KM report into complaints about councils in Kent. Of the 14 councils in Kent, Swale ranked 10th lowest, which I think is a really good reflection on our staff and the work we all carry out. It's easy to harp on about complaints in isolation, but taken across this board, this is a comparatively positive outcome. Though I would still urge people to continue to let us know when we let you down, because that helps us to improve even further the services we offer. On a brighter note, turnout at remembrance parades across the borough was really impressive this year, and I think the march in Sittingbourne was excellent. So well done to all those involved in putting this on, the other services across the borough. Looking forward as we start to get ready for the Yuletide season, it's heartening to see the return of Christmas fairs and other events starting to appear in village and town calendars. And I encourage you all to try and attend and support as many of these as you can, so we can help our communities as they rebuild after the COVID crisis.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. I'd now like to invite Councillor Alton to give a response. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Leader, and thank you for extending the courtesy of letting me see what you had written in advance. An incredibly thought-provoking piece of work. Some interesting issues that it raised for me. COP27 in the World Cup. COP27, greenwashing. It's where governments make excuses and they make promises, but nothing changes. Politics is like that, right the way down from the top to the bottom. We are making a change here. We have changed to a committee structure. But we need to work together to make it work. How can it be? How can it be that in 2022, a 2-year-old boy died because he ingested mould from a former council house that wasn't properly maintained? That, people will say, was because there wasn't any money. There was money. What there wasn't was the ability or the desire to make tough decisions. To decide where to spend the money is the tough decision. And politicians often are short-term in their views, and that includes us as well. Because we work on a 4-year cycle, governments work on a 5-year cycle. We don't see and we don't work the big picture. And we, as we move forward as a council, need to get up out of that and see and work together on the big picture. I was listening to the radio this morning and there was a speaker on there talking about health provision in Northern Ireland. And I appreciate I'm drifting a little bit, but I hope you'll see why. She had done a comparison between Northern Ireland and Manchester in health provision just before COVID. And in Manchester, there were 10 people out of 1.9 million who had failed to see a consultant in 1 year. In Northern Ireland, which also has a population of 1.9 million, 120,000 had failed to see a consultant within a year. And yet, interestingly, Northern Ireland pays far more per head for its health service than Manchester does. So that is not about money, it is about people and the decisions that they make. So I think it's really, really important that we focus on the decisions that really matter and spend the money where it really matters, because I don't think we want to be in a council where a 2-year-old boy dies because we made the wrong decision.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. All right, I'd now like to open it up to invite other members to respond. Are there any other members that would like to respond? Councillor Truelove.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and very briefly, it's very disturbing to hear that the levelling up bid is now delayed to the end of the year. Have we got any explanation for this continued delay?
Councillor Martin.
Thought that thought-provoking piece would actually generate a few more comments this evening. The leader's right. Uncertainty from government leads to uncertainty everywhere. And the leader of the opposition is right. Actually, the death of a 2-year-old as a result of damp mould in an affordable housing property is despicable. It is down to choices. Choices that have been made by successive governments and by housing associations that change chief exec willy-nilly. And I'm erring on the side of caution, so I don't get myself in trouble as well. What you find is that the money that is there, the limited funds that are available to housing associations, because realistically 98% of the stock will be mortgaged to the head in order to produce more affordable stock for the needs of the people in the areas that those housing associations work in. And though they're not just bringing in rent and renting out houses, most of them are doing other things too. And the things that they are doing are there to try and support. And occasionally stuff slips through the net, but it's not good enough. They have to be better too. In terms of COP27, again, couldn't agree more, it is for the hot air. Where's the real action? Where's the action on the climate change? Where is the action to tax the profits of those that bring out these fossil fuels across the globe to aid the people to make a change and adapt? It is a somewhat downtrodden and depressing time in some ways. But I'm sure by working together across the chamber, all parties, all groups together, we can find a solution and a way forward as best we can with the limited resources that we will have for next year.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Whiting, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just a quick question, really. I mean, I'd like to first of all ally myself to the comments that have been made by both the Leader and the Leader of the Opposition with regards to those big world issues. But picking up on one of them, the COP27, yes, we all feel there's a lot of greenwashing going on, lots of talk and no action. But with that in mind and taking into account the comments made by Councillor Horton that we should be looking first at our own circle and what difference we can make. I just wonder whether the Leader can give an update on where he feels we are in achieving our net zero by 2030 here in Shrine.
Councillor Valentine, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd also like to pick up on COP27 from the Leader's statement. One thing that where of course members will recall that one of the first things the administration did was to declare a climate emergency and put in place an action plan to reduce our carbon emissions. And one of the things we did was sign up to a scheme known as the Race to Zero. This is organised by CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is an NGO which registers carbon emissions and reductions for cities, for companies across the world. They're now doing it for cities, and we're one of 1,000 cities or administrative regions that report our carbon emissions to CDP. And they're all reported in a consistent format so that they can be compared globally. So tomorrow will be the first time that we are ranked in the CDP Race to Zero, and there's going to be some press tomorrow on those ratings. So I urge members to look out for that for our local contribution to COP27.
Thank you, Councillor Valentine. Councillor Simmons, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question for the Leader. In view of the delay and the rising costs, do you regret commencing the extensive work to Swale House?
Councillor Bonney, please.
I quite agree with comments made by both the Leader and the Leader of the Opposition. There's a rarity there. But with regard to packages, the support packages for councils, I think the recognition is it's councils, but it's also far wider than that. I know the Leader of the Opposition digressed somewhat into health provision, but I think one of the biggest issues facing our area is the lack of health provision and what measures we can take as an authority. I know recently I've attended various symposiums. One of it, Women Together, Jobby, from what is now our ICB. And it's absolutely clear that to date they have worked at a very slow pace to make that change. And I think for us as an authority, in order to improve the life chances of our residents, that initial GP access, particularly around the Sittingbourne area where it seems most dire, needs to be forefront. Would the leader agree with that?
Thank you, councillor Bonny. I've been sort of fairly flexible with questions rather than responses to the leader's statement. I do have councillor Gould.
Thank you. Mine is, it's just really a response. It's about the linkage between the autumn statement that we're expecting and the framing of that statement, which is often about not wanting to pass on debt to future generations. And really, I was glad that the leader did speak about COP27, because actually that really is the biggest debt that we will pass on to future generations if we do not actually tackle the issues that were raised there. And although there is an element of a talking shop about it, I think it is important that actually the talking happens, and that hopefully that the issues will be addressed. Because if we don't address them, the debt that we will leave to future generations in terms of the ruination of this planet will be something that will not forgive us.
Councillor Bowen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Still carry on with the COP27. Perhaps it's me, but sometimes I wonder how green credentials are when you have such a conference as that in Egypt, when you have all these countries taking their own private jets or an aircraft to fly to such countries, and yet, but there is pun intended, in Egypt they are so far away from making any sort of real change. And then within a week of that, I know, and it's still only early, and within a week of this, you have the G20 in Bali. I mean, how green or how environmentally friendly are governments meant to be, when for actually the purposes of which they get from these conferences, in all honesty, could they really not embrace technology and do it on Zoom? And then one other quick point, it's been mentioned about the budget for next year, and we've talked about the cost of living. I would be interested, or I hope that one of the ambitions of this council for the forthcoming year is to be aware and mindful of this, or whatever the budget is we've come up with for next year, and the implications it has on the people of Swindon and the pockets and the money was in their pockets to pay for this, because everybody needs the money. Thank you.
Yes, councillor Coles.
Thank you. I'm going back to much more local issues now, I'm afraid. I just want for clarification for me from the leader. I'm a member of the congregation at Trinity Church, and there was a lovely thing about all the money that had been spent at Brigwood Church. And I go every Sunday, and the vicar and I, we all talk to them, just wonder what the money was spent on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just thought, as Councillor Bowen was talking about private jets and all the rest of it to go to Sharm el Sheikh, I thought we could bring it a bit closer to home. I admit I drove my car here tonight, but I do take my hat off to colleagues who put their money where their mouths are and ride their bikes. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Harrison. I don't see any more hands at the moment. I'll go to councillor Baldock to sum up then, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's quite a lot there, so I'll try and address what I can, but may just slightly run over 3 minutes.
Oh, don't know about that.
That's fine. I'd like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his contribution. Yeah, I fully endorse what he says, and the regrets about a child dying in those conditions is absolutely appalling. And I thank him for mentioning that tonight and reminding us of that. Councillor True, I've asked, do we have a reason why the levelling up bid has been delayed? No. As soon as we know, we will pass that on. Councillor Whiting asked for an update on net zero. I'd just like to confirm that the Swale Chief Executive is the lead Chief Executive in Kent on climate, and I've asked her to work with the team to provide a full update at a member briefing. And of course, Councillor Valentine will be giving us an update early in the new year on where we are. And I would not dare to presume what he would tell us at that point. Somebody asked me if I had regrets, not nothing to do with my statement, but anyway, do I have regrets that we are improving Swale House? No, I certainly do not, because that is going to be a much better building, going to provide income for this council, and it was well overdue. Much like a lot of the work on buildings that the council have responsibility for. Monique, yes, I would agree that health needs to be the forefront of our concerns and of those responsible. We do have ongoing concerns and they need to be addressed. Somewhere Trinity Church came in, Holy Trinity Church in Queenborough. Probably could just about link back to the parades. A little bit of misunderstanding from some members. The issue was what we'd spent across the whole borough on various churchyard improvements for health and safety and maintenance, things that hadn't been done very well for a long time. We started tackling that. Queenborough was one example. You were invited along, nobody came. You could have been shown the work that's been done. You weren't there, so you didn't get to see it. But it's only a small bit that we've done across many different churchyards. And we just wanted to highlight the fact that that work had been done. Queenborough was one of those places that we chose to let people know. Shame nobody came along. Lloyd, I've got Lloyd noted. I think I agreed with a lot of what you said. And Alistair, you have hopes that something will come out of top 27.
Would you
please,
would you please use the correct titles when referring to members?
As
councillor, with their surname rather than names.
Oh, Lloyd. Sorry, Councillor Bowen. Far too much familiarity. Breeds contempt, I've heard. Sorry, Councillor Bonnie. I think I might have referred to you as Monique as well. And anybody else I've done that to, I do sincerely apologise. Have I finished? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, members, we move on now to agenda item number 7, motion for use of barbecues. At the last meeting, we had a long motion, which I agreed should be read out. This was for the sake of the public and members who may not have had a chance to read it in full detail. The feedback I've had on this was positive, and I understand that the Constitution Working Group are currently considering a change to the Constitution to be brought to Council for consideration in due course. In the meantime, I intend to use my discretion to ask proposers of the motions and also amendments to read these out before the debate on them begins. This will not count as part of their time those members have to make their speeches and will not count as part of the overall time limit of 30 minutes on each motion. A motion concerning the use of barbecues has been received as set out on the agenda. One amendment has been received and was tabled for members. Councillor Bowen, I'd like to invite you to propose your motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Councillor Bowen, if you wish to come forward, you can do. And if you read your motion, and then you'll have time to make your statement after.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. An amendment has been tabled that I think diverts the leadership on this subject from Swale Borough Council, but makes us a bystander waiting for central government to create a ban that we know is highly unlikely to come to whomever is in power.
Councillor Bowen, are you actually reading from your statement, or are you making your speech now?
I will get to it.
Yeah, if you could read your statement, your motion first.
I'll get to that.
Councillor Bowen, you've got to read this first before you go into what you're going to say.
Yeah. To summarise, Mr. Mayor, it is with huge regret I will explain the reason behind this. that I am not proposing, and I withdraw the motion. And the reason being, I reached out today to the proposer of the amendment, the chair of the Environment Committee, to see if the aspects could be composited or combined. I actually agree with writing to the government and our MPs, in addition to us doing something of our own accord. This would have covered all the bases, but I regret that despite this offer, the proposer of the amendment refused to engage with this.
Councillor Bowen, sorry, you said that you wish to withdraw your motion.
Yes.
Right, that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Members, as with the constitution, the motion has been withdrawn before it was proposed. So therefore, we move on now to agenda item number 9. Agenda item number 8, the pet surprises motion was withdrawn earlier today. So we move now, as I say, to agenda item number 9. So agenda item number 9 was an urgent motion which was put to me to be allowed onto the agenda, as we had previously 2 motions at that particular time. This I was happy to allow as an urgent motion. I did receive clarification from Councillor Valentine earlier today as to why it was considered an urgent motion, for which I allowed it. So the urgent motion re the attack on nature. A third motion was received as set out on the agenda in accordance with 3.1.14 of the Constitution. I've agreed this is an urgent motion, so it can be debated tonight. I invite you to read your motion, Councillor Valentine, and then you will have your 5 minutes to present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the motion is as follows. Council notes there is widespread anger in response to the government plans to remove fundamental legal protections for our environment. Opposition has come from many organisations, including the RSPB, the National Trust, the Wildlife Trusts, and Friends of the Earth. The government is removing protection for nature in a 3-pronged strategy by 1, scrapping planning rules that protect nature in new investment zones, covering huge areas of the country. 2, revoking environmental protections introduced by the EU without plans for replacement. And 3, withdrawing plans to help farmers protect nature, with reports suggesting that the environmental land management scheme has been put on hold whilst a return to a common agricultural policy type per acre payment is expected. However, we know that people's livelihoods and local economies can be put on a sound footing with investment in nature recovery, in renewable energy, in sustainable transport, and in home insulation. The recovery of nature and the revival of local living standards should go hand in hand. Council resolves that the Leader of the Council to write to the Prime Minister, 1, expressing the value which local people place on green spaces, countryside and wild places in the Borough of Swale, and the vital role of such amenity to maintain good physical and mental health. Reminding the Prime Minister of the appalling decline in wildlife, including bird and insect populations, and the urgent need to reverse this decline. 3, pointing out that local councils require government support and appropriate policies to deliver a step change in the use of active travel, energy efficiency of buildings, and renewable energy that is essential to deliver a local plan which is compatible with the government's statutory obligations on net zero emissions and the council's ambitions for achieving net zero and the restoration of nature in the borough. And 4, demanding that the existing protections for wildlife habitats, nature and agricultural land, including the requirement for biodiversity net gain, are as a minimum retained or better enhanced in all aspects of the planning system, including investment zones. That's the end of the motion. So, as you will have noticed, this motion refers to 3 proposals for changes, induction of investment zones to repeal of EU legislation and changes to the proposals for payments in support of agriculture. I want to start with the middle one of those, which is the repeal of EU legislation. So the retained EU law revocation and reform bill is now before Parliament. This is currently in committee stage. If this bill is passed, it will repeal or reform 2,400 regulations that have been retained in UK law from EU legislation. Of these 2,400 laws, 570 cover regulations within the remit of DEFRA, in other words, on the environment. There is a sunset clause in the bill by which, unless reformed, the laws will be revoked at the end of 2023 without any further recourse to Parliament. It is impossible to imagine that the government will have time to review all 570 environmental legislations, or even the full 2,400 covered by the bill. So therefore, many protections for nature are likely to be swept away without proper consideration. Some of these include very important regulations, for example, the Habitat Directive, which for the last 30 years has been the backbone of environmental protection in the planning system, and which introduced special areas of conservation. So these are likely to be removed without any further recourse to Parliament. I think it goes without saying that we value the importance of these regulations that provide protection for many areas within Swale. And any members of the planning committee will be familiar with many of their provisions. Then going on to the final part of the motion refers to the environmental land management. So this was perhaps, I mean, this motion isn't about Brexit, but I, for one, have been someone who struggles to see the benefits of Brexit. But if there is a benefit for Brexit, I would have thought this is one of them, in that we could move away from the common agricultural policy payments, which pay farmers merely for owning land, and instead pay them for providing a public good to manage that land in an environmentally friendly way and to provide habitat for wildlife and protection for endangered species and so on. This legislation has been very slow in coming forward and has been repeatedly delayed. And now it seems likely that it is to be replaced and going back to a simple payment. I think that's something which would be a great disappointment. And this is an opportunity that we would encourage the government to grasp. And finally, we've already mentioned investment zones in the leader's statement. The Kent County Council is proposing investment zones, so currently none in Swale. So if they're established and they happen, of course, there's no guarantee they won't happen in Swale in the future. They sweep away virtually almost all planning protections and allow development virtually without control. I think that's something that would very much concern us. It would undermine us as a local authority to exercise our planning powers through planning department and of course the planning department. Finally, if I've got a moment left, I'd just like to point out there is no mandate for any of this. The Conservative manifesto of 2019 put forward the environmental land management payments which we are proposing. The rest has no mandate, and so we would, in writing to the Prime Minister, we're urging the Prime Minister to in fact enact their mandate from 2019, which the Prime Minister has stated is the mandate on which he stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Valentine. I'd now like to ask Councillor Sarah Stevens to second the motion and ask if you wish to speak now or reserve your right.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll second the motion and I'll reserve my right.
Thank you. So I'd now like to open up the debate to members. Members note that they have a maximum of 3 minutes per member to speak in the debate. Democratic Services will be timing you. Councillor Henderson, please.
I'm not sure it's a good idea me being first on this, but let me say, I will support this motion because I agree with the thought behind it. But I have to say, I do so with a heavy heart because I think it's a useless motion. We all know that sending a general statement to the Prime Minister will do no good at all. We might, if we're very lucky, pass it on to the Secretary of State for the Environment, although I doubt even that. And if we are to have any impact on any of this, we will have to go into considerably more detail in order to identify the most important laws which we must not allow to go at the end of 2023. And I agree there's a huge danger in that. And we also need to comment much more on the detail of requirements in the NPPF and perhaps in this wider area of investment zones. But let's vote on it by all means. But if we want to have an impact, we're going to have to do far more than this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Simmons, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like Councillor Henderson, I have some difficulty with this motion. And that is because it's not a good motion. Because actually it's partially untruthful. And I'd like to read you a quote, a direct quote from the press release from DEFRA, which is, "We do not intend to go back on our commitment to the environment. We remain fully committed to our ambitious plans to halt the decline in nature by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050 while delivering growth." So, members, there is absolutely no intention to draw back from the old scheme, and suggestion of return to a CAP-like system is totally incorrect. It would have been so much better if this motion to a council known for its fruits in the heart of the Garden of England, with some of the country's top horticultural businesses within it, had acknowledged the vital role of fruit production in the borough and the council's support for the role farmers have in looking after the countryside and producing quality food. I call on the proposer and the seconder to withdraw their motion so that a better worded motion could be presented to a future council meeting. As it stands at the moment, I will be voting against this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Simmons. Councillor Hall, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a thoughtful evening, this. I agree entirely, Councillor Henderson, about the nature of the action that is proposed. I have a great deal of sympathy for what Councillor Simmons has said. And it seems to me, I understand that this was an emergency because we wanted to get our comments in prior to a parliamentary debate. I understand that, but as a council, if we want to make a good stand on preserving our countryside, and I took my grandchild out into the countryside last week, and I don't want to see it go away, I think we should give proper time at a proper committee to properly talk through what it is that we think is important within our environment. I also think, and I'll throw this one in just for thought, if we as a council want the leader to send a letter to government, does it really require that 47 of us sit in a hall and discuss it for half an hour? Can we not come up with a scheme where the leader
talks to the leader of the opposition, says, we would like to send a letter to the government, and we say, yeah, and what about you include this paragraph? That would seem to me to be a far better way of getting business done quickly, promptly and efficiently, rather than take up what is effectively 24 hours of people's time, an entire day spent on this.
No, we're not changing our plans.
So,
I'm sorry, but I don't think Pitts Hill House
so,
is going to descend
you're,
into a cloud of dust just because you and
so,
you are both out on
sorry.
the same day.
I'm sorry.
Ian's there, isn't he? Chris is.
Flo,
I've done it.
I think she was agreeing with me.
Please, councillor Hall. Councillor Gould, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having been castigated last full council motion, full council meeting for putting forward a motion that was too long and too detailed, we're now, unfortunately, this motion is being attacked for being too short and not detailed enough. And I think to go through, I mean, the point of the motion, one of the main points about this motion is about this wholesale destruction of all these laws that have been carefully built up over the years with UK's input in many, many cases. They're just being jettisoned without due thought. And that is the urgency of the motion, is that this is the bill that's going through Parliament to sweep away these environmental protections with no thought for their replacement and no realistic prospect for their replacement. And I think in that sense, this is an urgent motion, and I certainly will be supporting it.
Councillor Baldock, please.
Mr. Mayor. I welcome this motion. I think it's important that we as a council, waiting back to like me writing letters again. I think it's important this council has the opportunity to raise these issues, to demonstrate their concern. Unlike the proposal, I was in favour of withdrawal from the EU. I looked forward to us introducing better legislation. And, you know, 2019, Prime Minister Johnson was telling us that was what he was going to do. So I welcome that, and I think that would be the start of a number of good initiatives. And well, but it stopped, didn't it? If, in fact, DEFRA are correct, and they're not planning to let these regulations up, they are planning to continue with the environmental land management scheme, then they will welcome the support from this council. They will be glad people are supporting them. And if they're not, but it's right that we should tell them we think it's the wrong thing to do. I hear about the fruit producers in Swale, many of which have settled their land for housing development, don't develop fruit anymore at all, grow houses. Of course, we are one of the most important fruit producers in the country. And this is why, when we speak about the environment, and when we speak about the impact of regulations on our environment, it comes from a place where we know what we're talking about, where we have a vested interest in protecting our environment. So I don't think we should delay. I don't think we should go back, think about it, and let another motion come forward, especially not a motion that might be withdrawn at the last minute. We don't get to talk about it. I think we should support this motion. But yes, I welcome the idea that we should also continue talking about these issues, continue to come up with ways of raising our concerns and challenging this government on what it's doing, where it's doing wrong, which does seem to be quite a lot of time. So I will be supporting this motion and I will welcome it.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion has my wholehearted support. First and foremost, I'll mention something that happened over the weekend. I had the joys of listening to a member of the House of Lords explaining to us what's going on in terms of some of these EU policy changes, the changes to the legislation that was there before, and how a government minister sat in front of them at a committee and didn't have a clue what they were talking about on changing rules for trade. We just tried to copy and paste the original EU wording, change the word EU to UK, despite the fact that then referenced items that we're no longer a part of. Now, if that happens with environmental legislation, we're absolutely screwed. It can't be enforced. How can you go about changing so many items in a single year? It's not going to happen with proper scrutiny if you try and do that. We have to make sure that government is held to account. If they're not going to do it themselves in Parliament, they need the views of us slack-jawed yokels here in Swale that know about fruit to tell them about the environment. Then we'll go and tell them about the environment. To rightly write to the Prime Minister, I'm sure Prime Minister Sunak, as we're going to be all formal, and not Prime Minister Peffel Johnson or whatever his name was, or Prime Minister Truss, whichever one we got this week, might actually learn a thing or two from this lovely council, the way we work together at times in the benefit of our residents and to push forward the points that we all believe in.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Nicholas, Hampshire, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion is sort of titled "A Motion on Environmental and Habitat Protection in Planning, Land Management and Energy Policy." And I don't think actually any member here, I was going to say the chamber, but it's not, in this hall, would actually disagree with the thrust of that title. However, the motion focuses on the negatives, and it focuses on things that are completely outside control of Swale Borough Council and its councillors. What it could have done tonight is actually propose something that was much more positive and actually make sure that Swale was a pioneer on environmental protection and protection of its green spaces, etc. Now, much has been made tonight about the widespread anger that this legislation may have in Parliament. However, I would say there's a lot of widespread anger in Swale by having not a new local plan in place, which is leading to development in areas outside of where it was prescribed to be. Take Uphill Park, for example. And that is the fault of the administration and actually the previous cabinet member for planning. Now, it's been mentioned that there are opportunities in the planning system where conditions have been able to be put in place. And there has been some positive working relationships going on with developers and members of the planning committee. That said, as what was repeated at the environment committee meeting, that doesn't necessarily carry any legal standing because it's not in the local plan. So I go back.
Councillor Hampshire, can we actually stick to what's in the motion, please, rather than the local plan?
What I'm saying is, if you really want to deliver environmental protection for the people of Swale, then have some control over your planning system, which this council, at the moment, under its current administration, does not have. The motion as read is negative and is totally outside of the control of this council. But there are opportunities that this council could do to make people's lives better, if only it had the guts to put forward something more positive than what has been presented tonight. And it's all very well talking about national government and you must legislate for this, and you must legislate for that. But we in Swale have loads of pioneering businesses that take it upon themselves to go above and beyond what the legal statute may require or not. Why don't we actually support those rather than saying what people can or cannot do?
Councillor Bonney, please.
Very much, Mr. Mayor. I wholeheartedly, to repeat your words, support this motion. To get back to where we are, we have over the last few years been promised this and promised that, and not an awful lot has been delivered. And a good example of that and the environmental impact it would have is about housing targets. We were promised a target of 300,000 in Miss Truss said she was going to demolish that, and now Gove is going to hang its hat on delivering that. So we don't know whether we're coming or going, and it's a bit like DEFRA, so it has no intention of doing something. However, what we want is a cast iron guarantee on our environment and habitat protection. We can't have this flakiness of will we or won't we have an environment to be enhanced and looked after. So I think we have to start with this message. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonney. Councillor Harrison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also wholeheartedly support this. When I read about the number that they were planning on getting of regulations they were planning on getting through by the end of the year. I thought there was no way you're going to be replacing them, they're just going to go. I also think that we ought to, I'm not amending, but I'm just mentioning that local MPs should know our views here. And can I say, Mr. Mayor, as you've indulged other people, this administration inherited one hell of a lack of maintenance on its assets in this borough. And if it weren't for this administration, that town clock in Sheerness would have dropped off and fell on somebody's head and killed them. Thank you.
Well, I was definitely blindsided by that one. Councillor Trudeau.
Yes, I think the reassurance from Councillor Simmons from this government is somewhat less than reassuring. We cannot be sure that they won't U-turn on that tomorrow, or they won't change the minister on Friday, or they won't actually change the Prime Minister next Monday, because we all know to be Prime Minister at the moment, you have to have the support of the extreme right wing of the Conservative Party. And what they salivate over is the idea that we're going to get rid of EU regulations. And it's quite clear from statements made by the Prime Minister that that is exactly what he wants to do as quickly as possible without scrutiny of the value of each of the regulations, because it will go down very well with the extreme right wing, it will go down very well with the Daily Mail, and everybody will applaud him because he's got rid of all that useless EU regulation, which actually is protecting our environment. So don't be put off by this. You know the technique. You put forward a motion, then you withdraw it, and then we put forward a motion, and then you try and say, we don't want to waste half an hour on that. Well, we've got an extra half an hour because I withdrew theirs. So this is an intelligent, well put together motion. It's short, as the court said, we're pressurised to make it short. The idea that we shouldn't do this, that just the leader should talk to the leader of the opposition. Well, this has come from a member and another member. So what's it got to do? This member is asking the leader to do something. The implication of the leader of the opposition is that it's just the business of the leader to decide it. Well, that doesn't happen on this council, not anymore.
Right, I haven't seen any more hands go up yet, so Councillor Stephen, I invite you to speak.
To support this motion and urge fellow councillors to do so too. Our future and the future of and that of future generations, that is at stake in the environmental protections of, if these environmental protections are removed. You only have to look at the responses from those who care for nature, which have been overwhelming. Here's just two. Joan Edwards, policy for the wildlife trusts. So these policies will mean polluters can get away with poisoning our rivers and our countryside, even more than they are doing already. Hilary Brady at the National Trust says environmental protections are dismissed as burdens, while investment and growth are pitted against nature and climate action. These proposals come as a part of the Dash for Growth package with no mandate, which sees the protection we currently have lost. We should be looking for more protection of the environment in these times of climate crisis. This is just what the original idea for the environmental land management payments to farmers set out to do. To pay farmers for the public good of providing habitat to encouraging wildlife and promote biodiversity and protect endangered species. It would be a tragedy to revert to pay farmers merely for owning land as under the Common Agriculture Policy and lose the potential to improve biodiversity of farmland. Protection and the use of our environmental assets is key to evening out economic imbalances between metropolitan and rural areas. So key to getting that right balance. We all value access to green spaces near our homes for recreation and exercise, such access is good for our physical and mental well-being. We should not risk up regulations that protect what green space we have left. Thank you.
Excuse me, members. Throat. Right, I'd now like to ask Councillor Valentine to sum up his motion, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so I'll just go through some of the issues that have been raised. Councillor Anderson offers a counsel of despair that there's no point in doing anything. While I can see that perhaps the outcome of this motion may not have the impact we desire, doing nothing is never achieved anything. And I think coming as a motion from the whole council rather than just from the leader adds some weight to it. And if councils around the country stand up for their family rights, I'm sure the government will hear the message. Councillor Simmons, I think, quite unfairly accused me of being untruthful. He read out a press release from DEFRA, which said absolutely nothing about a commitment to ELMS. It was about a commitment to a target in 2050, which we won't be around to hold them to account. They won't be there to be held to account. This motion is about ELMS, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which the government's idea, and they appear now to be backing away from it. And the DEFRA quote only rather enforces my view that they're backing away from it. I live, my garden backs onto a commercial orchard, and I see the environmental schemes that come and go. One year there's a wildflower border left at the side. It's there for a couple of years, and then it's ploughed up. And next time they're just cutting every other grass cut. They're doing every other row in the orchard. That lasts for a year or two. As the funding changes from year to year, we produce absolutely no benefit. To have a proper environmental management scheme with agriculture would benefit the environment and benefit farmers. I mean, that's the whole point of that issue. Councillor Hampshire complains that the motion is negative. Well, that rather reflects the legislation that the government is putting forward. We could have written a very happy, clappy, jolly motion, but it wouldn't have any impact on trying to get the government to do to respect the environmental land management, to help us repair nature. He bemoans the delay of the local plan, but the very reason for the pause in the local plan is the government chopping and changing on their guidance for planning, or just providing no guidance at all, which makes it impossible for us to bring the local plan forward in a timely fashion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Valentine. Right, so I'd now like to ask members to indicate their preference on this motion.
Maybe we call it vote.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay then. So for, against or abstain, Councillor Baldock. For. Councillor Baird. For. Councillor Bonney. Councillor Bowen. For. Councillor Carnell. For. Councillor Roger Clark. For. Myself, for. Councillor Davey. For. Councillor Eakin. For. Councillor Fell. Councillor Gibson. Councillor Gould. Councillor Hall. Councillor Anne Hampshire. Councillor Nicholas Hampshire.
Abstain.
Councillor Harrison. Councillor Henderson. Councillor Horton. Councillor Hunt. Councillor Ingleton.
James.
Councillor Jackson. Councillor Knights. Councillor Martin. Councillor McCall. Councillor Neal. Councillor Nisanga. Councillor Palmer. Councillor Perkin. Councillor Pugh. Councillor Rolls. Councillor Saunders. Councillor Simmons.
Again.
Councillor Paul Stephen. Councillor Sarah Stephen. Councillor Tatton. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Trullo. Councillor Valentine. Councillor Whelan. Councillor Whiting. And Councillor Winkles. Okay, so that motion is carried. You members, I propose now that we take a brief adjournment for a comfort break. If you can please be back in your seats by 8:30. Thank you. 8:30.
Sorry, what time is
Thank you, members. Reconvene the meeting at 20:30. I've just been apprised of something that I was remiss of. Unfortunately, I wasn't aware at the time when I made my mayor's statements that Councillor Hall would be attending the Sunnybank Primary School opening tomorrow. My apologies, Councillor Hall. I wasn't made aware that you would be there. And apologies, Councillor. I wasn't made aware that you would be there. Is there anyone else I've offended? Right, so we move on now to agenda item number 10, questions submitted by the public. There are 2 questions submitted by members of the public this evening. So firstly, please could I call forward John Greenhill? Thank you, Mr. Greenhill.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'm sure there are several councillors who will know that the old Adult Education College in College Road is one of Sittingbourne's most iconic, beautiful and historically important buildings, and we have very few left in Sittingbourne. My question is, what precisely is happening to and at that former college building, and what exactly is the current planning application situation, having regard to the planning permission in respect of flats and houses granted to the former owners of the site? Now, Mr. Mayor, this question, most regrettably, is one that has to come before full council, because despite several requests staunchly supported by my ward councillor, the planning department has failed to provide any information. I don't know whether it's because it's intentional or they can't do it, but it's a matter of grave concern that that should be the situation. And when you couple that with the content of a letter in today's issue of the Sittingbourne News, it gives rise for great concern and worry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Gibson, I believe this is your remit.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your question, Mr. Greenhill. So, planning permission and listed building consent were granted on the 9th of May 2022. Both applications went to the planning committee in October 2021 with an officer recommendation for approval. The members agreed with this recommendation subject to the Section 106 agreement being signed. There was then a period of delay because after the planning committee, the applicants, Wildwood Limited, put the property on the market and it went to auction, where it was bought by City Developers Limited. This meant that the new owners also needed to be party to the Section 106 agreement. The Section 106 agreement was signed by all parties and sealed on the 5th of May 2022. And to date, no applications to discharge the conditions have been submitted to the council. The original applicants, Wildwood Limited, currently have a pre-application lodged with the council for 10 self-built apartments on land adjacent to the adult education site, which is designated local green space and sits inside the strategic countryside gap.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Do you have a supplementary?
If I may, please, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, does it mean that the original planning permission granted of 8 flats for the main building and some terraced houses remains in situ, or is it open now to the Reardons who own that property company to submit a fresh application to change the planning permission?
Okay, so my understanding is that the Permissions that we have at the minute remain in force until such time as any amendments can fall to the planning committee through the usual routes. So those original consents will remain in force.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call forward Mr. Julian Speed, please.
Whilst the council waits 12 to 18 months before publishing the next Reg 19 consultation on the grounds of awaiting clarity on planning policy from government, but also, of course, because the council has lost control of the local plan process, will the leader confirm that all inappropriate, non-allocated and out of scale speculative planning applications will be refused in order to protect the precious green spaces in our borough, and that the existing approved local plan will continue to prevail? I ask this in the hope that before the local plan Reg 19 consultation emerges, the council will also set out a clear timetable for early public communication and engagement. As I'm sure the leader will agree, residents would benefit greatly from understanding your emerging thinking on development and infrastructure, as opposed to you simply presenting them with an impenetrable fait accompli Reg 19 document, as happened last time, where residents can only comment on the complex legal grounds of soundness, compliance and duty to cooperate.
Councillor Baldock.
Thank you for your question. Firstly, I think it is necessary to correct some inaccurate assumptions. The comment the council has lost control of the local plan process is simply not true. The local plan process is flawed. It makes demands of local councils that are unreasonable, and it is utterly undemocratic. So to suggest that we have in any way lost control of the process presupposes an agreement with that process that quite simply this council does not share. We are focused on pushing for the best achievable solution for Swale in the face of dreadful legislation. We will not roll over and simply acquiesce in the destruction of our borough, but will fight for what we believe is suitable. The local plan has been paused to allow for further clarity from the government, and this action has allowed the council to retain control of the process of the production of a local plan review. It is hardly this council that is losing control when one looks at the state of the national government over the last few months. And it is this national government who is changing priorities, contradicting statements, and headless chicken approach to future planning that has left many councils without any faith in the current process and deciding that trying to produce a local plan in these circumstances is simply an expensive and pointless folly. Regarding the determination of planning applications, all applications, regardless of whether they are on allocated sites or not, and whether they are speculative or not, must be considered on their individual merit. Applications will continue to be determined in line with national and local policies and guidance as the local plan review continues to emerge. The extant local plan, bearing fruits, continues to be a material consideration in the determination of applications. I would like to point out, however, that the comments made by some that this means it is a green light for developments is also simply not true. We have been in this position effectively since February 2019, when the previous administration's local plan failed the 5-year housing test. During that time, we have continued to reject inappropriate development and have won many cases at appeal, despite the lack of a 5-year supply in the tilted balance. We will continue to prioritise those applications which are in line with policy and oppose those we find unsustainable and which breach our policies. Prior to the local plan progressing to the next Regulation 19 stage, full consultation plan will detail the public engagement and consultation that will be carried out. Regulation 19 consultation is carried out with the purpose of seeking the views of residents, businesses and stakeholders as to whether the local plan reviews are legally compliant and have been positively prepared, are justified, effective and or are consistent with national and regional policy. Therefore, representations can only be made on those grounds. Consultation at Regulation 18 stage is where interested parties are invited to make representations to the local planning authority about what a local plan with that subject ought to contain. Recent changes in central government have meant that the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is once again being progressed through Parliament, and therefore it is anticipated that once it becomes clear what changes are likely to be introduced, the council will be in a better position to determine how we take the local plan through the process.
Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I thank the leader for his response. He protests that the council has not lost control of the local plan process. Does the leader not agree that if there'd been a second Regulation 18 consultation in February 2021, as many of us called for at the time, rather than a flawed Reg 19 comprising plans that residents weren't expecting, before realising the error and reverting to Reg 18 in November, those 9 months wouldn't have been wasted and we might have a new local plan in place by now?
Thank you for your supplementary. Yes, I protest. I could read out again explaining why, but I shan't. I could go 30-second comments. The Reg 19 that we put forward in at the time was put together with the expectation that the government may possibly change the housing target to 14,000 new houses that we had to find. Therefore, it was essential that we tried to get something through for consultation before then. Nothing in that Regulation 19 should have come as a surprise, because it had been through the local plan panel. All the elements of it have been discussed. It is down for ward members to alert their residents if they think there is an aspect in that Regulation 19 and the prior discussions to it, to alert them to it so that they are fully enabled to respond to that Regulation 19. But a Regulation 19 gives us the responses from statutory consultants that we need to argue what exactly Swale can deliver. It's not enough to put out a Reg 18 and expect statutory consultants to give us responses. When you put a Regulation 19 out, they have to put responses that they're willing to defend at the inspection. For that reason, we get more information from that Reg 19, which enabled us to say how unsuitable Swale was for the level of housing that this government is trying to put upon us. I don't regret that. I think that was an excellent exercise, which gave us the information we need. The next Reg 18, I invite everybody to take part in it. I think we have followed the process with really astute acumen, trying to show that this government is putting an unreasonable demand upon us, gathering the evidence to demonstrate that, and kicking back against their unrealistic and unsustainable housing targets.
So that brings us to the conclusion of members of the public question. So we now move on to agenda item 11, questions submitted by members. We have 2 questions have been received from members. So firstly, I would like to call Councillor Whiting, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm grateful to you. What progress is the question for the chair of the Housing and Health Committee, please? What progress has the council made in reinstating primary care services in Tenement Institute Ward following the closure of the only GP surgery in the ward earlier in the year? What alternative premises has the council suggested to the NHS that may be suitable for GP surgery in the ward? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whiting. Councillor Martin.
Firstly, I would like to point out that it is not the responsibility for the council to reinstate and run primary care services. This is the responsibility of the Medicare practice and NHS Kendal Medway. That said, we have been liaising regularly with the primary care estates team, who are continuing to support the practice and seeking an alternative permanent site. Prior to the closure of the Tenement Institute surgery, which was a decision outside of the NHS control, both the council and the NHS looked for suitable relocation sites, including a review of any land and property holdings of the council, which are extremely limited in this area. As no suitable locations were identified, the surgery has temporarily relocated to the Memorial Medical Hospital. Primary Care Estates team are continuing to look for a new site and is working closely with the council to identify any opportunities through a planning-led process and land and capital contributions through any future Section 106 agreement.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'm grateful for Councillor Benjamin Martin for the answer. And I'm grateful also that the council has been making representations on behalf of our residents in Tenham and Linstead for this. I visited, just if I may, just as an aside, I visited the centre at the Memorial recently and heard of cases where people are not going to a GP appointment because they cannot get there. So this is a really important thing, which I hope we can continue to work across part of, Mr. Mayor. And with that in mind, could I ask the chairman of the Housing and Health Committee, through you, that the ward members be involved in those conversations that are taking place with the health authorities as we move this forward and hopefully come up with a solution. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Whiting. I do recall that you've offered on a number of occasions to walk with members of the NHS primary care team through your ward to locate a suitable property. I believe that offer has been expressed by the council through the head of housing, communities, health, and I can always forget the rest of Charlotte's title. Do forgive me. I do believe that has been passed to the NHS, and I'm sure I can ask Charlotte to pass it on again. Ask that we once again invite them to come through with yourself and Councillor Bowen through to see if we can find somewhere suitable.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Right, so the second question we have is from Councillor Martin.
Yo-yo time. This is for the leader of the council, Councillor Bullock. Does the leader of the council agree that the UK and Swale has a proud history of supporting refugees, like those currently fleeing war and persecution in Yemen, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Syria and Hong Kong, and that refugees are welcome in Swale? Does he further agree that all persons have a fundamental right to be treated with dignity and in accordance with the international law and in line with the UN Convention on Human Rights, the UN Convention relating to the status of refugees and its subsequent protocols? Does he believe that though the letter sent from Kent leaders to the Home Secretary highlights some valid concerns, it included language which was at best regrettable and at worst inflammatory, and that the intention was to provide a case for additional support from the central government, including for the acceleration of the asylum process, rather than inflaming anti-migrant sentiment?
Thank you for your question. And perhaps we can just start referring to Councillor Ben Martin now. The day seems a little superfluous. This country, and indeed Swale, absolutely has a proud history of welcoming and supporting refugees from various asylum programmes over the years, most recently seeing many of our residents open their homes to those fleeing the war in Ukraine. All of Kent's leaders have been proud supporters of various schemes, including VPRS, Afghan and Ukraine. As leader of the council, and I would hope to speak on behalf of every member here, I and the council absolutely believe in dignity for every human being and that human rights for all absolutely need to be upheld. This is why I, along with other Kent leaders, including those from both the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, as well as the Conservative leaders, felt it necessary to hold the Home Office to account. The letter was a line in the sand, a recognition that the burden being placed on Kent by the Home Office, not by the migrants themselves, was unsustainable and inequitable, and as a result, impacting on local services and communities. The leaders felt that should this continue, it risks the service failure, worsened outcomes for everybody, inflamed community tensions, and ultimately a potential risk to life. I do not agree that the language was inflammatory, but it did seek to clearly and explicitly express the strength of feeling amongst Kent leaders that the current situation has to be resolved. The burden on Kent has to be recognised and shared across the country rather than looked at in individual cohorts in isolation. Already since the letter, a further 3 sites have been secured by the Home Office in Kent, without any consultation or engagement. I'd just like to add that I will be meeting with Robert Jenrick, though I don't know his official title, on Friday to continue discussing this matter.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Martin?
I'd like to start by thanking the leader for his response. Further to this, it does form a two-parter in the supplementary, I'm afraid, so my apologies for that. It is bizarrely my first time answering a question, asking the question, Council. Does the leader feel the press coverage of the letter, especially following the terrorist acts against migrants in Dover, added fuel to the flames of anti-migrant sentiment, and that the conditions at Manston are tantamount to a concentration camp on Kent soil?
Thank you, Councillor Martin. I'm afraid I didn't really read the press coverage, so I can't pass comment on that. And I haven't studied the conditions at Manston, so it would be hypocritical of me to pass judgment or make a statement on something I really don't have any knowledge about. So I apologise for my total lack of knowledge of those two questions.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. So we've moved along now to agenda item number 12, allocation of committee seats. Please can members confirm that they have received Appendix 3? Thank you. And in that case, then I invite Councillor Baldock to introduce the report proposal recommendation.
Okay, I think it's fairly straightforward. I'd just like to add that the SIA member for audit will be Councillor Palmer, and I think this is all fairly straightforward. I don't think there's too much debate, so I'll propose the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll gladly second this motion, and I'd like to speak now, if I may. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognise the work that is done by Mrs. Jo Millard, to give her a full title, and her team as the Democratic Services Manager and the Democratic Services team. This is never an easy task. It's a mathematical calculation. I guess if we wanted to criticise the government, we'd probably call it an algorithm. But it is a mathematical calculation, which is then followed by a lot of hard work getting the numbers to work as a council. And I think you've had to do it too many times, quite frankly. And we've all seen the consequence of that. So please, on behalf of the council, take our thanks for it. I commend the papers and I think that's probably the way done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. Councillor Whiting?
Just a clarification, apologies. I missed when Councillor Baldock mentioned a change in Councillor Palmer. I missed that.
Councillor Palmer will be the SIA representative on audit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock.
That's an additional one, yes.
Right, are there any other members that wish to speak to this agenda item? Oh,
sorry, I hate to be that person that extending. I just wanted to extend my thanks as chair of the Standards Committee to Councillor Davey for his support in that.
Good. Right, so move to the vote then. All those in favour? I believe, if I can see correctly, that is unanimous.
Oh, yes, it has.
Yeah, that is carried unanimously. Okay, thank you, members. That concludes this evening's business of this full council meeting. So I officially close the meeting at 20:54. Thank you for your attendance, members. Well done, Mr. Mayor.